Rejected Omega followed a white wolf howl through a blizzard. Unaware, the savage Alpha King led the call. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. Elena Moore had learned the sound of silence long before the snow began to fall. The kind of silence that settles after a door closes and no one calls your name. The kind that tells you exactly where you stand without a single word spoken. And tonight, as the blizzard swallowed the edges of Frostvale, that silence wrapped around her tighter than the thin coat on her shoulders. The wind slicing across the open land with a bitter chill that read 10 degrees below zero on the old metal sign half. Buried by snow, every step she took sinking ankle-deep as the world blurred into white and gray, her breath puffing in short, careful clouds while she counted them to stay steady, one breath, then another, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the way the pack had looked past her as if she were already gone, how being rejected had a weight of its own, heavier than any storm, heavier than the mile-long stretch of frozen ground between her and anything that could be called shelter. Yet she kept moving, guided by instinct more than hope. When the wind shifted and carried something unexpected through the roar of the blizzard, a sound that was not harsh or threatening but clear and steady, a long white wolf's howl that cut through the night like a signal flare, low and resonant, rising and falling with a calm certainty that made her stop without realizing she had done so, her heart slowing as if the sound had reached inside her and turned a key, because it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like an invitation, and though logic told her to turn back, her feet angled forward, following the echo as it rolled across the frozen hills, each step warming her just enough to keep going, the distance stretching in measured spans. She guessed it by landmarks buried under snowdrifts. Half a mile here, another there, until the wind softened and the land dipped into a narrow valley where the storm seemed to pause, the air quieter, the snow lighter, and there, framed by moonlit drifts, stood a white wolf on a rocky rise, its coat bright against the dark stone, its posture unhurried, watchful, eyes reflecting the cold light with an intelligence that made Elena's pulse quicken, not with fear, but with recognition she could not explain, as if the howl had been meant for her alone, as if the path through the blizzard had always led here, and while she did not know it yet, while she could not possibly know that the call she followed had been led by the savage Alpha King himself, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment her life would begin to change. Elena did not step closer right away because something in her understood that moments like this were fragile, that moving too quickly could shatter whatever invisible thread had drawn her here. So she stayed where she was at the edge of the valley, snow whispering around her boots, while the white wolf watched her with a patience that felt deliberate, the storm now reduced to a distant murmur behind the rise, as if the blizzard itself had chosen to give them space, and she became acutely aware of small details she had ignored before, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat slowing, the ache in her fingers fading just enough for sensation to return, the way the cold no longer felt hostile but strangely contained, like it was waiting for permission to press in again. And when the wolf lifted its head slightly, she felt the motion more than she saw it, a quiet acknowledgement rather than a warning, which made her realize she was not afraid, not in the way she had been afraid hours earlier when she stood on the outskirts of her pack grounds pretending she did not care as familiar faces turned away, because fear had been replaced by something steadier, a cautious awareness that this encounter mattered, even if she did not yet understand why. And she took a single step forward, testing the ground, the snow firm beneath her boots, then another, closing the distance by a few yards while keeping her hands visible, palms open at her sides, instinct guiding her to show she meant no harm. The wolf remaining still, its pale eyes never leaving her, reflecting the moonlight with a depth that suggested thought rather than instinct. And she wondered briefly how long it had been standing there before she arrived, whether it had waited, whether the howl had been sent into the storm with the expectation that someone would answer, and that thought sent a quiet shiver through her that had nothing to do with the temperature, because no one had ever waited for her before, not truly, not without condition, and she found herself speaking aloud without planning to, her voice low and steady despite the cold, telling the wolf that she was not looking for trouble, that she only followed the sound because it felt like the right thing to do. The words carried into the open air where they lingered and faded, met with silence that did not feel empty, and when the wolf finally moved, it was slow and deliberate, stepping down from the rock with careful precision, snow crunching softly under its weight as it closed the space between them until only a few feet remained, close enough that Elena could see the fine texture of its fur, the subtle rise and fall of its breath, the calm authority in its posture that made her lower her gaze slightly without being told, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, as if some unspoken rule had been activated the moment she crossed into the valley. And in that quiet, she felt something settle inside her, a sense of alignment she had never experienced before, as though the path she had been pushed onto by rejection and loss had curved unexpectedly into purpose. And though she did not know the truth, though she could not yet imagine that this white wolf was more than it appeared, that it was the living will of a king whose name carried weight across the north, she sensed that whatever came next would not be a return to what she had lost, but a movement forward into something unknown, something that would ask more of her than survival. And as the wind stirred again at the edges of the valley, whispering of the blizzard waiting beyond, the wolf turned its head slightly toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the sheltered land, not commanding, not forcing, simply indicating a direction, and Elena understood without question that the choice to follow was hers, just as it had been when she first answered the howl. And after a single steady breath, she stepped forward once more, aligning her path with the white wolf's, unaware that with that decision she was walking straight into the gaze of a destiny far greater than anything she had ever been allowed to dream. The path the white wolf chose narrowed as it curved between frost-coated pines, the snow packed firmer here as though many unseen feet had passed before, and Elena adjusted her pace to match the steady rhythm ahead of her, noticing how the cold no longer bit as sharply, how her shoulders relaxed despite the long miles already behind her, because something about walking beside the wolf felt strangely grounding, as if the land itself recognized the presence moving through it and softened in response, the moon drifting higher to cast a pale glow that outlined the wolf's broad frame and illuminated the trail just enough for her to follow without stumbling. And she wondered again how something so powerful could move with such restraint, never rushing, never looking back, yet always aware of her position, a quiet certainty that kept her from falling too far behind. And as they continued deeper into the sheltered valley, the wind faded almost entirely, replaced by a stillness that felt deliberate, protective, the kind of calm that settled before an important decision rather than after it. And Elena became aware of how much noise she carried inside herself compared to the silence around them, memories surfacing without warning, the way she had been taught to keep her head down, to accept less space, less voice, because being an Omega meant learning how not to be seen, and yet here she was, walking openly beneath the moon, following a creature that neither ignored her nor dismissed her presence. And that simple contrast tightened something in her chest she did not have words for. And after what felt like nearly a mile, the trees opened into a clearing shaped like a natural bowl, snow smooth and untouched except for a few broad stone slabs rising from the ground. Ancient and worn, the air warmer here by a few degrees, enough that Elena could feel it against her face. And the wolf slowed, coming to a stop near the largest stone before turning to face her fully for the first time, holding her gaze in a way that made her straighten without thinking, her posture shifting as though responding to an unspoken expectation. And she realized then that this was not a meeting born of chance, that the howl she followed had not been a coincidence carried by the storm, but a deliberate call placed carefully into the world. And though the thought should have unsettled her, it instead brought clarity, because if someone or something had called her here on purpose, then perhaps her rejection had not been the end she believed it was. Perhaps it had been a redirection, and she took another step forward into the clearing, boots pressing into the unmarked snow, feeling a subtle hum beneath her feet like a quiet pulse through the ground. And the wolf lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, as if recognizing her choice to stand rather than retreat. And in that moment Elena felt something inside her shift, a faint awareness unfolding at the edge of her senses, not overwhelming, not dramatic, but present, like a door opening just enough to let light through. And she realized she could feel the wolf in a way she had never felt another being before, not hearing thoughts, not sensing commands, but recognizing intent, calm and focused, layered with a strength that was held in careful balance. And she understood then that whatever lay beyond this clearing would require the same from her, balance rather than fear, awareness rather than submission. And as the wolf turned once more toward a narrow passage beyond the stones, leading further into the hidden land, Elena did not hesitate, because hesitation belonged to the life she had been pushed out of, not the one unfolding now, and she followed, unaware that each step carried her closer to a truth that would redefine not only who she was, but why she had been called at all. The passage beyond the stones sloped gently downward, the ground firm beneath a thin crust of snow that reflected the moonlight in soft silver tones, and Elena noticed how the air grew calmer with each step, the lingering edge of the blizzard now far behind them like a closed door she no longer needed to watch, her breath evening out as the white wolf led her along a winding trail bordered by low ridges and snow-laden brush. And though the distance stretched on, she did not feel the familiar burn of exhaustion, as if something unseen was lending her strength in small, steady increments, not enough to overwhelm her, just enough to keep her moving forward with purpose. And she began to realize that this journey was no longer about escaping the cold or finding shelter. It was about choosing to keep walking even when the path offered no clear promise. And as they traveled, she became aware of subtle changes around her. The faint scent of pine deepening, the sound of distant water moving beneath ice, the land revealing itself in layers as if responding to the presence beside her, and she wondered what it meant that the wolf did not rush ahead or abandon her to follow at her own pace, but instead maintained a measured distance, close enough to guide, far enough to allow her autonomy, a balance she had never been given before, and memories rose again, quieter this time. Moments when she had learned to anticipate rejection before it came, to make herself smaller so others would not have to acknowledge her, and she felt a strange sense of grief for that version of herself even as she understood she was leaving it behind with every step, because here, in the open quiet of the valley, there was no one watching to judge her worth, no hierarchy pressing down on her shoulders, only the path, the wolf, and the steady pull forward. And after what she guessed might be another half-mile, the trail leveled out near a stand of tall evergreens whose branches formed a natural canopy, the snow beneath them thinner, the ground darker, and the wolf slowed again, glancing back just long enough for Elena to register the look as reassurance rather than instruction. And she found herself trusting that signal without hesitation, her instincts aligning with his in a way that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. And when they reached the center of the grove, she noticed signs of quiet habitation, not structures, not fire, but impressions in the snow that spoke of rest rather than movement, of pauses taken deliberately, and the wolf stopped, turning to face her. Once more, his presence filling the space without overwhelming it. And Elena realized this was not the end of the journey but a threshold, a place meant for reflection rather than answers. And she felt the weight of the moment settle gently rather than press, as if she were being given time to breathe before what came next. And she took that time, standing beneath the trees, listening to the muted world around her, feeling the warmth in her chest grow more defined, more certain, and she understood that whatever had called her into the storm had done so not to test her endurance alone, but her willingness to step into the unknown without being forced. And though she still did not know who or what truly stood before her, she sensed that the choice she had made to follow was already shaping her future in ways she could not yet name. And as the wolf turned and moved deeper into the grove, clearly expecting her to come, Elena followed without looking back, unaware that the simple act of choosing her own direction had just marked her as someone the North itself would soon recognize. The grove grew denser as they moved forward, the evergreens closing ranks until moonlight filtered through in narrow beams that painted shifting patterns on the snow. And Elena became aware of how quiet her own thoughts had grown, the constant self-doubt that once filled every pause now replaced by alert calm, as if her mind had learned a new way to listen, and she noticed the white wolf slow its pace again, its ears angling slightly as though sensing changes beyond sight, prompting her to sharpen her attention to the subtle cues around them. The way the air felt heavier ahead, charged with something unseen, not threatening, but expectant, and she realized that this stretch of the journey felt different from before, no longer just a passage through the land, but a crossing into awareness, because the further they went the more she sensed layers beneath the surface of the world. Faint impressions in the snow that suggested paths taken and erased, echoes of movement that lingered, just long enough to be felt. And she understood that the north was not empty as she had been taught. It was watchful, alive, and discerning. And as they reached a natural rise overlooking a wide frozen basin, Elena hesitated, the openness below stirring an old instinct to retreat, to avoid being seen. But the wolf paused beside her rather than ahead, his presence steady and grounding, and she felt a subtle reassurance in that shared stillness, the sense that she was not being led blindly but invited to see. And as she stepped forward to the edge of the rise, she felt the basin respond, a gentle pressure like a held breath. And though she could not name it, she sensed that this place recognized authority, not the loud kind that demanded obedience, but the quiet kind that came from alignment rather than dominance. And the realization sent a ripple of awareness through her, because she felt it respond not only to the wolf but to her as well, faintly, tentatively, as if measuring her willingness to stand rather than hide. And the wolf turned his head slightly toward her, not meeting her eyes but acknowledging her presence at his side. And in that moment Elena felt something deepen, the revelation rather than danger, the quiet pressure before understanding breaks through. And as they began their descent into the basin together, Elena felt a calm certainty settle in her chest, not that the road would be easy, but that she would not be lost within it, and that whatever the north intended to reveal, she was finally ready to see. As they descended into the basin, the temperature shifted again, not warmer, but steadier, the cold settling into something controlled rather than chaotic. And Elena noticed how the white wolf's movements became more deliberate, each step measured, as if aligning with something unseen beneath the frozen ground. And she felt that same alignment echo through her, the subtle hum she had sensed before now clearer, like a low current running just under her skin. And she realized that the tension building inside her was not fear of the wolf or the land, but anticipation, the quiet pressure that comes before truth surfaces. And when they reached the center of the basin, the wolf stopped abruptly, lifting his head toward the open sky, the moon now unobstructed, bright and full above them, casting sharp silver light across the snow. And Elena followed his gaze instinctively, feeling a strange pull toward the light that made her chest tighten and her breath slow. And in that stillness she became aware of how completely the world had gone quiet. No wind, no distant movement, no sound except her own breathing and the steady presence beside her, as if the north itself had drawn back to watch. And the wolf turned then, not away, but toward her, fully, his pale eyes meeting hers without distance, without concealment. And Elena felt the impact of that gaze like a question asked directly into her soul, not demanding an answer, but waiting to see if she would hold it. And she did, lifting her chin slightly, grounding herself in the snow beneath her boots, refusing to look away, because something inside her understood that this moment mattered more than any she had faced before. And the wolf took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence despite the cold, close enough that the space between them felt charged with meaning. And she sensed then that the presence she had been following was not merely guiding her through the land, it was evaluating her, not with cruelty or judgment, but with clarity, measuring not her strength, but her willingness to stand in uncertainty without shrinking. And she felt a quiet certainty settle into her bones, the knowledge that whatever this was, it had not chosen her by accident. And the wolf shifted again, his form seeming to blur at the edges for just a heartbeat, not changing, not transforming, but revealing depth she had not seen before, a layered presence that felt far larger than a single being. And Elena's breath caught, not in fear, but recognition, because she understood then that the authority she sensed was real, ancient, and restrained by choice rather than limitation. And she realized with sudden clarity that the howl she followed had not been a simple sound carried on the storm. It had been a summons, and she had answered it, not because she was compelled, but because she was ready. And the realization did not overwhelm her. It steadied her, anchoring her in the knowledge that her rejection had not diminished her worth. It had cleared the path for this moment. And the wolf lowered his head slightly, a gesture that felt like acknowledgement rather than dominance. And Elena felt something inside her respond in kind, a subtle alignment, not submission, but mutual recognition. And she understood then that the next step would change everything, that the truth she was about to face would redefine her place in the world whether she wished it or not. And yet she did not feel trapped by that inevitability. She felt chosen, not claimed, but seen. And as the moonlight intensified, casting long shadows across the basin, Elena stood firm, unaware that she was standing at the edge of a revelation that would soon reveal the white wolf not as a guide, but as the living will of a king whose call had reshaped the north itself. The silence in the basin deepened until it felt almost tangible, pressing gently against Elena's senses as the white wolf held her gaze, the moonlight sharpening the contours of his form until every breath, every subtle shift, felt magnified. And then something changed, not abruptly, not with spectacle, but with a quiet inevitability that made her heart still, because the presence before her seemed to unfold rather than transform, the space around the wolf bending, as if accommodating a truth that had always been there. And Elena felt the air thicken with awareness as the white fur seemed to blur into light and shadow, the shape before her rising, lengthening, resolving into a tall human figure standing where the wolf had been moments before, bareheaded beneath the moon, shoulders broad and posture unyielding, wrapped in the same calm authority she had sensed from the beginning. And Elena's breath caught as recognition struck her with startling clarity, not of a face she had seen before, but of the presence itself, unchanged despite the form it now wore. And she understood without being told that this was the same being who had called her through the storm, the same will that had guided her steps across frozen ground. And the man before her met her eyes with a steadiness that held neither apology nor arrogance, silver-gray eyes reflecting the moonlight with a depth that spoke of command tempered by restraint. And Elena felt the weight of that gaze settle over her like a mantle, rather than a chain, because it did not diminish her, it acknowledged her. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried the same resonance as the howl she had followed, low and measured, filling the basin without raising volume, introducing himself not with flourish but with certainty, naming himself Rowan Blackridge. And Elena felt the name ripple through her awareness, not because she had heard it spoken aloud before, but because the north itself seemed to recognize it, the land responding with a subtle stillness that confirmed what her instincts already knew, that this man was the Alpha King whose authority shaped territories far beyond this hidden valley. And yet the weight of that realization did not crush her as she had once imagined such power would. Instead, it clarified everything that had felt uncertain before, because the way he stood before her now was not as a ruler demanding submission, but as a leader who had chosen to be present, to be seen, and to see in return. And Elena realized that he had not revealed himself sooner because the moment required her to arrive here on her own terms, not as a subject answering a command, but as a woman who had chosen to follow without knowing who called her. And Rowan did not step closer, did not crowd her space, allowing the truth to settle between them, naturally, giving her room to breathe, to process, to decide what this revelation meant for her. And she felt a flicker of instinct urge her to lower herself, to acknowledge rank the way she had been taught, but she resisted it gently, grounding herself instead in the snow beneath her boots, meeting his gaze evenly, because she understood now that the choice to stand mattered. And Rowan seemed to register that choice with a subtle shift of approval, not spoken, but felt. And he told her simply that the howl had been a call meant for one who would hear without fear, one who would follow without coercion. And Elena realized then that her rejection had not been a mark of weakness. It had been the clearing away of what did not belong to her path. And though she still did not know what awaited her beyond this moment, she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would be the same again, because she had stood before the Alpha King of the North and remained herself, seen and unbroken. And as the moon reached its highest point above them, casting their shadows long across the basin, Elena understood that destiny had finally stepped out of the storm, and spoken her name without needing to say it aloud. The weight of Rowan Blackridge's presence settled into the basin without pressing down, giving Elena space to absorb the truth now standing before her. And she noticed how the land itself seemed to acknowledge him, the snow gleaming brighter under the moon, as if reflecting an authority older than memory. And yet he did not move to claim that space, did not reach for her or command her attention, instead allowing the silence to stretch until she realized he was waiting, not for submission, but for her response. And Elena felt the familiar instinct to apologize for existing rise in her chest before she pushed it aside, understanding now that this moment was not asking her to shrink, and she drew a steady breath, grounding herself in the cold beneath her boots, reminding herself that she had walked into this valley by choice, that no one had dragged her here. And when she lifted her eyes to meet his again, she did so with a quiet resolve she had not known she possessed, and Rowan's expression shifted subtly, something like approval passing through his gaze, though his posture remained calm and controlled. And he spoke again, not with grand declarations, but with clarity, telling her that the North listened to those who listened to themselves, that the howl she followed had been sent not to summon obedience, but to test awareness. And Elena understood then that he was not explaining himself for dominance, but offering context, allowing her to stand fully informed rather than overwhelmed. And she found herself asking the question that had been forming since the moment he revealed himself, not with accusation, but with honest curiosity, asking why he had chosen her, a rejected Omega with no standing and no claim. And Rowan did not answer immediately, his gaze lifting briefly toward the open sky, as if considering the weight of truth, before returning to her with unwavering focus. And he told her that strength revealed itself differently than most expected, that it often appeared in those who had nothing left to protect except their integrity. And Elena felt the words settle into her chest with surprising warmth, because they named something she had carried without recognizing it. And he continued, explaining that the North did not need another obedient voice. It needed those who could hear the call without being blinded by ambition or fear. And Elena realized then that this was not an offer disguised as kindness. It was an acknowledgement of capacity. And that realization stirred something deep within her, not pride, but alignment. And she felt the faint connection between them strengthen, not as a bond imposed, but as a resonance. Two paths intersecting because they were meant to. And Rowan took a measured step back, deliberately restoring distance, reinforcing that the choice ahead remained hers. And he told her plainly that what he offered was not escape from hardship, but a place where her presence would not be dismissed, where her voice would be heard without needing to fight for it. And Elena weighed the words carefully, aware that power spoken softly often carried the greatest weight, and she realized that the tension she had felt since entering the basin had shifted, no longer building toward revelation, but toward decision. And she understood that accepting what lay ahead would change her life irrevocably, but so would turning away. And she thought of the blizzard she had walked through, the silence she had endured, the choice she had made to follow a call into the unknown. And she recognized the pattern now, that every step forward had required courage without certainty, and this was no different. And when she spoke again, her voice was steady, not because she lacked fear, but because she no longer let it decide for her. And she told Rowan that she did not know what place awaited her in his world, but that she knew who she was when she stood here, and that she would not trade that clarity for safety alone. And Rowan's gaze softened almost imperceptibly, the North's savage alpha king acknowledging a truth he respected. And as the moonlight continued to bathe the basin in silver, Elena understood that whatever path unfolded next would be built not on command or rejection, but on recognition freely given. The moon began its slow descent as the basin exhaled, the quiet tension dissolving into a stillness that felt earned rather than imposed. And Elena sensed the shift immediately, the land no longer waiting but accepting, as if a decision had been made simply by her choosing to remain present. And Rowan Blackridge turned slightly, not away from her, but toward the wider north, his posture opening the space rather than closing it, signaling that what came next was not confinement but passage. And he spoke with the same measured calm that had guided her since the storm, telling her that the path forward would be visible now that she had answered the call, that the North would recognize her not because of rank or title, but because she had listened when listening mattered. And Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with belonging earned rather than granted. And she realized that the fear she once carried of being unseen had finally loosened its grip, replaced by a steadier awareness of her own presence in the world. And as Rowan began to walk toward the edge of the basin, he did not look back to check if she followed, trusting the choice already made. And Elena stepped forward beside him without hesitation, her pace matching his naturally, the path ahead illuminated by moonlight that seemed less cold now, less distant. And she noticed how the faint hum she had felt earlier expanded into a quiet clarity, not a voice, not a command, but an understanding that her life would no longer be shaped by the limits others placed on her. And as they moved, the land opened gradually, the frozen basin giving way to a broad ridge overlooking the north, vast and layered with distant valleys and forests stretching beyond sight. And Elena paused, taking in the scale of it, aware that this was not a promise of ease, but of scope. And Rowan stopped beside her, allowing her the time to see what lay ahead, and he told her simply that the north was changing, that old structures built on dismissal and silence would not hold forever, and that those who had learned to endure without losing themselves would be needed to shape what came next. And Elena understood then that this was the true offer, not protection, not elevation, but participation, a chance to stand in the world as herself without apology. And she felt the weight of that responsibility settle into her bones with surprising steadiness, because she knew what it meant to be ignored, to be pushed aside, and she would not carry those patterns forward. And as the first faint hints of dawn brushed the horizon, softening the edges of the night, Elena realized that the storm she had walked through had not been meant to break her. It had been meant to clear the noise so she could hear the call meant for her alone. And she stood taller now, not because someone had lifted her, but because she had finally stopped crouching, and Rowan's presence beside her felt less like authority and more like alignment, two paths moving in parallel toward a future neither fully controlled but both respected. And as the north stretched before them, vast and awake, Elena understood that the rejected Omega who had followed a Howl into a blizzard no longer existed as she once was, because in answering the call she had stepped into her own place in the world, and whatever name history would give her later, whatever role she would come to hold, one truth was already set: she would never again walk unseen.